This is a Muscle Cat Media production.
We are back on the Baseball Expats. Kind of. Rolsey and Spoon with you for, I don't know what we can call this, a soft launch for the 2026 season. The one thing that I do know for sure, Spoon, it's good to see your face. Hello, my friend.
Hello, mate. It is good to be back. We're only a few weeks away from spring training, and all sorts of things are happening off the field, off the diamond. So it's good to be able to jump back on and start to dissect what's been a pretty crazy few weeks already, and I think it's only going to get wilder as we get closer.
Yeah, look, we haven't done an episode in what seems like forever. At the same time, I was thinking that just before we jumped on, it felt like we just did the World Series episode like 2 weeks ago. But in another aspect, it feels like we haven't done an episode in forever, and that's because we haven't. Eric is quite busy at the moment. He's getting ready for a World Baseball Classic campaign, traveling with Team Australia. So we will hear from him in the coming weeks. Essentially, what we're going to do today is just have a look back at what's happened in the offseason and look ahead to the 2026 season. We'll also give you an update on sort of some things that we're thinking of for the 2026 season. We've got some interesting things up our sleeve and looking forward to what will be a fun season. But Spoon, you touched on it there. The offseason's been crazy, as it tends to be every year now in Major League Baseball. I think that we are hurtling toward a more interesting offseason next year, which I'll touch on here in just a little bit. But what's sort of been your main takeaway from the Major League offseason?
Yeah, I've got 3 headlines I'll talk to quickly, and I've even come up with creative little titles for them, which may or may not actually represent what we're going to talk about. But I'm going to start with, hey, mate, I'm not your mate. There's been a flurry of injuries over the last couple of weeks to star players with a fracture of a little bone in the hand called the haymate. I'm no doctor, but the treatment, from what I understand, does require surgery. So you just pull the thing out. So I guess it's one of those optional kind of spare part anatomy pieces, like the appendix, or having a filter when you talk. My beloved Corbin Carroll was the most recent casualty yesterday. He's gone under the knife to address that, and he joined Jackson Holliday and Francisco Lindor, who also had the same injury last week. Really interesting. It seems like it just comes from compression from repeated swings, like taking thousands and thousands of swings. You don't necessarily need to get hit in the hand for it to happen. The good news is that it seems to be a relatively quick layoff compared to more serious injuries. But it's still never nice to see stars of our game sort of missing time approaching spring training, and some of these guys have only been back for a week or so as it is. So something to watch there. If there's another haymate injury in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be having maybe a dedicated pod just to understand the haymate bone even more. The second thing, let's go O's. I kind of talked to you guys about this yesterday in the group chat, and maybe it's a good thing Eric isn't here, because I'm all in on a potential bolter in the AL East this year in Baltimore. They've made some really savvy moves. I don't think anyone would even claim to have called the signing of Pete Alonso. Some of the teams that were sort of in the mix for that signing were typically bigger market and bigger budget teams. But if you have a look at how that rounds out their roster, as well as some of the trades they've made to pick up some pitching, both starting and relieving, it looks like a really good team. And I think fans in baseball have a short memory, and you're only kind of as good as your last season, which is fair enough. But the roster's almost the same as 2 years ago, where they were a really competitive team and they were maybe too young to be making a playoff run. Without sort of any veteran leadership, they were just a bunch of well-accrued top prospects that they managed to get their hands on from so many years of being poor. I really think we're going to see that last year was the outlier and the fluke, not 2 years ago. And not to sort of jump into the betting stuff too early, I think they are a bit of value to win the AL, because I think that they now look like a deep team, and they still have enough young pieces and enough depth to be buyers at the deadline if they're hanging in that division with the Yankees and the Blue Jays. So let's go O's. Baltimore might be one of my little side projects this year. You've been warned early. It's going to be maybe a little bit more enjoyable to watch than me watching the Washington Nationals lose 100 games last year. But I do often like to adopt a couple of teams to follow. And Baltimore right now look like one I want to hitch my wagon to. And the third one is Naughty Nicky. I don't know how much, Rolsey, you've seen of the Nick Castellanos stuff, but I don't think anyone realized how bad it was last year. And I don't like what I'm about to say, this next sentence, but credit to the Phillies for how much they kind of kept a lot of this under wraps, because this was obviously playing out last year. I don't think anyone realized the extent of the breakdown in that relationship. And all of a sudden, it's clear Castellanos isn't going to be returning as a Philly this year. And with all of the sort of big names largely off the board as far as free agency, and, I think a lot of the trades that were going to get done have been done now. A really interesting one for me is who takes a risk on Castellanos. Does he go the way of, these sort of poor defensive, previously high power bats that have lost their way, like a Luke Voigt type that just sort of end up out of the league, or even a Joey Gallo? Or does someone take a chance on him, and is he a worthy kind of reclamation project, given the Phillies will still be paying all of his salary? It doesn't cost you much outside of the potential disruption to the dugout. For me, he screams prime New York Yankee material, because they love that kind of drama, and they need someone to cover Stanton for the 100 games he misses every year. But I think that's probably one of the biggest stories to follow over the next week or two as that unfolds further.
Did you get a feeling like, because I mean, I've obviously just seen this Castellanos stuff come through the last couple of days. Did you get a feeling like there was going to be some sort of major world disaster with all this Nick Castellanos news? Because it seems like the two go hand in hand. I was just bracing myself for some sort of imminent danger.
Yeah, or is nature now ready to heal? Because this is like the end of, if this is the last Castellanos headline, are we now no longer going to see some of the atrocities we've seen in recent years?
And are we calling it the haymate bone now? I mean, I've always been a haymate guy, but I can get on board the haymate train.
I don't have a backup title for the alternate pronunciation, so I'm kind of all in on, like hitching my wagon to that pronunciation.
I'm into it, man. Like, if we can make haymate a thing, I'm happy to do it.
It's very Australian.
Look, I mean, obviously one of the major things, I guess, that hasn't been a talking point per se in the offseason, but it just sort of feels like it's bubbling away in the background, is all this pre-CBA spending frenzy stuff that obviously is probably going to rear its ugly head more so next year. Just the way that owners are spending money. I mean, when you talk about, you, me, and Eric talked about it privately a month or so ago when that Kyle Tucker news dropped. 4 years, $240 million. Like, there's just cartoon type figures in the way that these owners are spending at the moment. And now we're starting to see a lot of these MLB.TV local RSN deals come through. And I think it's more teams than a lot of people expected it to be, which essentially for me, again, we talked about this and there's so much to unpack, and I'm sure that we will. As the season progresses, we get a little bit more news, and then obviously into next off season. But it seems like the way the owners are spending, there's going to be a huge disconnect for mine between the owners at the very top. When you think about the New York markets, LA, Chicago, maybe even Boston to an extent, some of these larger markets that are going to retain their regional sports networks are going to have a lot more revenue than some of these smaller markets that are basically being forced to go to this MLB TV model. I mean, we'll use the Cardinals as an example. It came out that basically their television revenue is going to be cut in half for next year compared to what it was the previous season. And it seems to me kind of dangerous that heading into a CBA, you've got Major League Baseball not dictating what teams are going to make in terms of broadcast revenue. I don't want to say that they're dictating. They're probably giving them fair market value. But it just seems like it's going to be three different factions in this CBA next year. It's going to be basically the top 5 ownership groups versus everybody else versus the players. I don't think it's going to be as simple as the owners versus the Players Association. I think it's going to be this 3-pronged attack, and we've never really seen anything like that before. So I think it's just getting swept under the rug a little bit, and people are looking at all of these giant deals that are getting signed and going, well, yeah, maybe they're not going to have to pay them, but they're going to be deferred or whatever it is. But the concerning thing for me is that Major League Baseball is now getting directly involved in team revenue from a broadcast standpoint. And I don't know if I'm just, look, maybe this is the Nick Castellanos news getting to me and I'm just having some sort of doomsday theory, but does it not seem like it's heading toward a really, really toxic and strange CBA agreement that'll basically rear its ugly head next offseason?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you look at the way it's gone, it's almost in reverse to how so many other sports have gone now, especially the major US leagues, right? Like to have such a fragmented system, really in a lot of ways, the MLB is ran like a league that operated 40 or 50 years ago more than a league now where everything's kind of been amalgamated and is done under one umbrella. Um, I'm somewhat more optimistic on this as far as lockout and that sort of thing, just because I feel like Major League Baseball missed the biggest opportunity as far as once in a lifetime in the 2020 season when all other sports around the world were pretty much unable to play in any sense. We ended up with a 60-game season that really could have almost been a full season. And you had the eyes of the sporting world at a time when, gambling was taking off in the US. People were stuck at home. Even things like baseball cards, as you know, for me and a lot of others sort of came back into play. To only have a 60-game season then, I think stunted the growth of the league. And I'm hoping that from that missed opportunity, there'll be a learning as far as not, nerfing a 2027 season too much. The counter argument to that, though, is that we're talking about the egos of billionaires and whether logic's going to push through, which I guess remains to be seen.
But do you not see my point, I guess, is that the gulf, Major League Baseball is almost artificially creating a gulf, whether they're doing this or not on purpose. I'm not accusing Major League Baseball of doing anything. A lot of these, when you think of FanDuel Sports that was Bally and a lot of these other regional sports networks, that's where a lot of mid-market teams make their money from their RSN. And if Major League Baseball now is all of a sudden dictating what that number looks like, it's almost like they're artificially trying to drive down the median price of regional broadcast to then go, hey guys, look, we need to have some sort of salary cap. Whereas you're going to get the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Cubs of the world that go, we don't care what's happening everywhere else. We're happy to continue to pay a luxury tax. So whereas I think owners have largely been on the same page in previous CBAs, I think this could be maybe one of the first times that even the owners have these little factions within them because they're fighting to go, well, sorry, it sucks that you lost your regional sports network and Major League Baseball is having to prop you up, but Sportsnet LA is giving us whatever it is, $1.5 billion a year so we can continue to spend like we want to spend. I think it's just going to be a really interesting conversation. Look, I hope this MLB TV thing, I'm getting a phone call. It's the worst when that happens. I'm hoping that this MLB thing works out, and I think it will. I think it'll make access to the games for people within the United States a little bit easier, but I think maybe one of those unintended consequences that we'll see is that it could have ramifications when we get to the CBA. But again, I don't want to harp on it too much because I think it's the kind of thing that we'll probably touch on throughout the year. Another thing probably that we'll touch on throughout the year is the St. Louis Cardinals. And look, I knew this team was probably going to have to sell. Chaim Bloom had sort of always talked about the way that the team was set up. They needed a bit of a change. I don't know that I thought we were going to get rid of as many guys as we did. I probably thought that Brendan Donovan was safe. He's the most recent to go. But when you talk about a guy like Wilson Contreras getting traded, Nolan Arenado obviously has gone to your Diamondbacks, and basically we got a bag of balls in return for him. It's just I can't remember a time in which a St. Louis Cardinals franchise is going to be as bad as they will be this year. I was looking at the market for it earlier for them in the NL Central. The Pirates are $10 to win the NL Central. The Cardinals are $21. So that tells you how bad the market is playing St. Louis. I can't remember a time whenever you had $21 next to a St. Louis Cardinals franchise, because it just feels like no matter what team they put on the field, they're always probably going to be in and around 500. But the market's telling you, ownership's telling you, the front office is saying this year that it's like, now guys, we're really going to have to beef back up the farm system. And look, there's a lot of metrics that have said that in the offseason, the Cardinals have gone from a middle of the road farm system to a top 5 farm system. They got some pretty good prospects in the Marlins or in the Mariners trade whenever they sent Brendan Donovan out west. But it just means that it's going to be another 4 or 5 seasons. And this, it kind of parallels to what I was talking to about St. Louis in the broadcast sense, is that it's kind of tit for tat, right? It's like you want people to show up to support the team so that they can spend more. But if the team is so bad that people don't want to turn up, you're not going to make the revenue to be able to spend more, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword that I think many of these teams that just aren't going to be very good are going to have to start to deal with. You think about teams like the Angels, things like the A's in particular. They've got their own issues, but the Rays who are trying to get this new ballpark out, your Washington Nationals. I mean, even teams like the Giants this year, maybe even the Diamondbacks to some extent. It really does. The Cardinals really feel like a case of what's happening to a lot of these sort of mid-major franchises heading into a CBA and just going like, guys, we don't know what's going to happen. And when we're on the teeter-totter that's much more toward the sell side, we're going to turn that into a super fire sale as opposed to going, we'll hang on to some guys and see what happens. Instead, they're just rebuilding. I mean, you remember this is a team 3 years ago that basically came out and said, guys, it's not a rebuild. We're just kind of retooling. We're changing some things in the way that we're running the organization. But I think all that's bullshit. We know that now because it's becoming a complete rebuild for St. Louis. And I think it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I think the counter to that would be the most St. Louis Cardinals thing ever for this year to be the year where the team wins like 87 games, wins the wild card spot.
Don't do this to me. Stop it.
I'm going to be betting the over on the St. Louis Cardinals win line because
what is it?
Enough. It's got to be like 70, doesn't it?
Oh. Don't do this to me, Spoon.
I'm just saying, like, when everyone is low on the team, it's usually when they come out and surprise you. I mean, don't forget that Seattle were expected to come last in the NL West this year. They were 101 or something preseason for the Super Bowl. The Patriots weren't far off. Those two teams squared off. Baseball's a little bit different, but it's not that different. Canberra Raiders were favorite for the wooden spoon last year in the NRL. Like, often when the consensus is this strong about a team, I usually want to buy because they are typically undervalued where they are. Yeah, like to your point, they're not going to be an extremely fun team to watch, but I'm not ruling them out maybe to the same extent you are. I want to see what their win line is. I've just got it here.
It's just going to be so young.
69.5.
Oh,
I mean, they still get to play the
gracious.
Pirates and the Reds, 14 times each. They'll get up for every game at Wrigley because they hate them. I can see a path to 70 wins of baseball without it being the most impressive thing. But I also made a great case this time last year about why the Washington Nationals were going to win 72 games. So maybe could be time if you're listening to this and you're a long-time listener to just smash the under.
You took the words right out of my mouth. It would be an excruciating watch if you take the Cardinals on the over. But hey, I'm happy to cheer with you throughout the year with St. Louis. But I think it's going to be one of the roughest years as a fan. And last year was pretty rough. I mean, remember they had that win streak early in the year. I think it was in May when they won 14 straight games or something. And I was really high on St. Louis. And then the next thing you know, the bottom came falling out. I mean, even again, like they weren't a horrible, horrible team last year. The record shows that they were, sort of middle of the road and hovering around 500 just below. But I think it's going to be a very different season in St. Louis. And I just hope that the best fans in baseball, as they call themselves, still head out to Busch Stadium because there seems to be a little bit of a divide between the fan base and the ownership of that team. And look, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the World Baseball Classic. I mean, it's awesome to have it back. It really feels like this time around that it's starting to, maybe it's finally become what Major League Baseball thought it would be. And look, I'm an international baseball perv, so it's probably, for me to be saying this is probably a little bit biased, but I'm interested in your take in it. And I mean, look, we weren't doing this show the last time there was a World Baseball Classic in 2023, so I don't know how excited you were for it. Do you feel like this is the most excited you've been for a World Baseball Classic?
I think so. I think the fact that Team USA are naming a lot of star players, which wasn't the case last time around, and I think them not just cakewalking it last time with the B squad, so to speak, no disrespect to my guy Merrill Kelly, was the absolute best thing that could have happened, because I feel like if Team USA rolled out a bunch of B graders, so to speak, and just dominated anyway, the concept would real struggle to get some more mainstream appeal, I think. But I think what's been cool about it is not just having the US guys, sort of the top players, put their hand up. That's meant that a lot of guys who have this like dual eligibility from other nationalities have gone to play there. And you've got guys playing for teams that you had no idea they were even eligible for, which does sort of balance out the competition a lot more. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I'm really big on the Dominican Republic team this year, and I'll probably be having a little bet on that as a result, because I do think they're if all those guys could sort of come to play and they take it seriously, which in a sense you'd think they might be a bit more patriotic and even less sort of injury preservation mode than maybe some of the American players. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch, but I'm really looking forward to it. When does it kick off? 2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, I believe. Well, the first game would be in Tokyo, and that's where Eric will be. I think 5th of March. Tokyo starts a day before everybody else, obviously to give them that chance to travel over for a quarterfinal. But yeah, I mean, it has to be between the United States, Japan, and the Dominican Republic, right? Can you see any of the other 3 teams winning the WBC? I can't. I think it's got to be one of those 3 teams.
Well, having a look at it right now, USA $1.91, Dominican Republic $5, Japan $5. You've actually got Venezuela at $8. I wasn't expecting there to be a third team that short, and then it blows right out to Mexico and Puerto Rico at 26s. But yeah, maybe Venezuela are getting a lot of respect from the bookies because I'm with you. If I was to price that market without looking, I probably would have had 250 US, 7s Dominican and Japan, and then no one else even close. So there's clearly a little bit of market share there for Venezuela.
Well, there seems to always be a sneaky quarterfinal team. I mean, the semifinals in 2023 were basically who everybody expected to be there, maybe with the exception of Cuba getting through to play the United States in Miami. Remember, Australia played Cuba in the quarterfinals, and Australia left 12 guys on base in that game and lost by a run. So Australia were very close to, we were very close to seeing, Todd Van Steensel pitch against Mike Trout in Miami in the World Baseball Classic back in 2023. So don't rule out the Australians potentially to get to a quarterfinal or a semifinal. I haven't seen a market on that, but for those wondering, Australia, $101 in the market that I'm looking at to win the World Baseball Classic. I don't think they'll be winning it, but if they can get out of the pool, that would be exciting for Australian baseball.
They do have pool markets, but yeah, they'd have to be beating Japan, and they're actually 4th in the pool betting. You got Japan $1.12, Korea $8, Chinese Taipei 13, and then Australia 21. So what is it? Top 2 go through?
Yeah, top 2.
So you'd probably be getting about $4 around to get out based on the pool win prices there, which may not be a bad bet if you've kind of got them closer to a Korea or a Chinese Taipei.
So that market was specifically to win the pool.
Yeah, but I'm just sort of pricing it off their 4th favorite, and they're probably. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next week or so we get some much more detailed markets for the World Baseball Classic as rosters are finalized and that sort of thing.
Just before we look ahead to sort of what the show's going to look like this year, and then we'll get to some of your future plays, at least early looks at some future plays. Just on this World Baseball Classic thing, I was thinking about this earlier, and I'm going to have a chat to Steven Nelson for a different project that we're doing, who's obviously Dodgers broadcaster and will broadcast the Tokyo Pool, the World Baseball Classic. Do you think that we have, how do I ask this question? Without the World Baseball Classic, do you think there is as much Japanese influence in Major League Baseball today as there is if there's no World Baseball Classic for the last, 15 years?
You'd probably still have to remove Ohtani from that question. I feel like, sure, it would probably make a bit of an impact, but I think the Japanese influence we're seeing now has been so driven by Ohtani's impact over the last, 6-7 years or whatever it is, that the World Baseball Classic might sort of pale in comparison. The two combined obviously help, and Ohtani, hitting bombs in the World Baseball Classic and pitching is great for the game. So the two definitely go hand in hand on that front. But I think there's probably a clear leading influence there. I also think as well, the fact that Japanese baseball did press on during that COVID season, like Korean baseball did attract a lot of viewership. Just to sort of circle back to that point before about the missed opportunity for Major League Baseball. There was a few months there in sort of June 2020 where the only sport on was Belarusian Premier League in the soccer, and then Japanese and Korean baseball. And you don't need to ask me how I know.
Well, yeah, I was going to, but you gave me the answer without giving me the answer. And look, I think if anything else, what it's done is it has legitimized Japanese baseball maybe to its own public. I mean, it's always been the national sport of Japan, but in some ways, I think maybe that fan base there who are passionate and love Japanese baseball maybe questioned their spot on the world stage against, I mean, Cuba was powerhouse back in the day. Obviously, you have the United States, these Latin American countries, but Japan having the success that they've had in the World Baseball Classic, I think has legitimized not only domestically in Japan, but to the rest of the baseball world, just how good Japan is as a collective.
And I think it's awesome that we've already seen, it'd be one thing if Otani came and had the influence he'd had, but then there'd been sort of no follow-up to that. But seeing Yamamoto come out and do what he did last year, we've kind of got this steady influx of guys now. And now you can kind of trust the hype to an extent, whereas maybe for a while there, outside of your Ichiros and that kind of thing, it was a little bit more like, oh, well, will they adapt? Will they adjust to, the American style of baseball? Now it's like, okay, when there's a lot of hype coming out about a prospect being shipped over from Japan, I think there's a little bit of a form guide now that you can trust.
Well, before we move on to look at some of Spoon's future plays, early looks at future plays, let's have a look at what Baseball Expats is going to look like this season. We've sort of been doing a little bit of work in the background, but continuing to formalize some things. We are going to do some what we're calling silo sessions in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, with Eric traveling, Spoon's off to Las Vegas for his 17th junket trip already of 2026. Guy's always traveling. So each of us will do a few solo episodes just to keep you up to date on what's going on in the world of baseball and markets as we hurtle toward not only the WBC, but also the Major League Baseball season. Destiny Draft will be back for 2026. We're still finalizing what the details look like for Destiny Draft, but I know a lot of the listeners enjoyed what that looked like last season. There'll be more theme teams as well. I don't know if we have any more themes that we can exhaust, Spoon, but I imagine that you'll probably give Eric and I some.
Yeah, I've got an unlimited pool of bizarre ideas, as you can imagine.
Spoon obviously will continue his pick segments that were wildly successful last year. Eric and I will continue the international beat. We're working with the World Baseball Softball Confederation on what some of that looks like for international events this year. And look, for the moment, all the episodes are going to stay on the main feed, but we are sort of looking at branching out, potentially Baseball Expats being the umbrella where different episodes set in. So stay tuned to the podcast, stay tuned to the Instagram account and everywhere else, and we'll let you know what's happening. Spoon, what are you most excited about for 2026 with the Expats?
Look, I am really excited about Destiny Draft. I feel like it was a fun kind of trial and error concept. We cooked up mid-season last year, and then between our travel schedules, all of us, and I think just the way we kind of got into it late in the season, we didn't build enough momentum with it for it to sort of be an every 2-week thing. But I'm really excited to have it as something that every week we're drafting, or every 2 weeks we're drafting and watching how these players unfold. And the really exciting part, I think, will be bringing in listeners as a guest spot and running a leaderboards and that sort of thing, and checking in at the end of each month with where we're going. And it did lead to some very niche baseball viewing last year. Like, I know you'd be the same as me. You'd end up with a guy on your team that you knew nothing about, and you'd be watching a Kansas City game on a Tuesday morning because he was making your only start for the, Seth Lugo was making your only start for the week for the pitching category. So it was a really fun way of following baseball, a fun sort of bit of content for us. But if we can now tie that in with viewers as well, and look at, potential prizes or something like that, or punishments. I'm much more of a stick guy than a carrot guy. I think that's going to be, one of the highlights for 2026.
You've got to be careful to not go hard overhead in Destiny Draft. Do you remember the infamous Michael McGreevy selection?
Yeah, I think you had Newt Bar as well, potentially cost you a week. Yeah, he had a decent week, but I think you're never picking someone who's terrible, but you often can leave someone on the board, right, who just goes and shoves, or has a 4 home run week or something like that. And I think that's where the rose-colored glasses maybe bit you and I a little bit more last year than Eric, because Eric was more than happy to. I think he let Vladdy go at one point. The guy's ruthless, right? He's just a mercenary.
Yeah, he didn't want to cop the strikeout numbers. Look, essentially what we're getting at, there'll still be multiple episodes per week this season. We're still sort of working out what that flow looks like. But like I said, stay tuned to the Baseball Expats main show. Like and subscribe. And as we continue to branch out and different shows get launched, we'll let you know what's happening with the show. But Spoon, let's give the people what they want. Because I'm not going to hold you to these. Maybe I will. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Give us a couple of things that you're looking at early, even if they're not plays, if they're not anything that you're necessarily going to put your hard-earned on or invest in at the moment. Give us a few things, and the listeners a few things early that you're looking at in some of these preseason markets.
Yeah, sure. So to your point, I'm not going to be investing just yet because as is very often the case, Bet365 have been first with posting a lot of these player props for futures, but typically within the next week or two, as we sort of get to the end of February, you'll see most major corporate bookies post the markets themselves, and that's where you can actually price hunt properly. And you should never really be taking 12s about something that you get 17s or 18s for elsewhere. So some of this is sort of just indicative and where I'm looking early and kind of circling a few that are up on Bet365 now, so that if I get a price I really like elsewhere, I can have a little bit of a stab. I'm, as you know from last year, always fond of the season strikeout numbers. And there's one guy in particular I really want to talk about and potentially even tie him into some value for the American League Cy Young. 220 strikeouts for Dylan Cease is currently paying $2.10. Now he's had 3 seasons of 220 or more, and the 2 seasons in the last 5 years where he didn't have that, he had 214 and 215. He has not missed a start in the last 6 years. I'm touching wood because anything can happen, obviously, but I really like the move from him to the Blue Jays purely because, and this is a little bit niche, but purely because of what Pete Walker did to former Diamondback Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray is almost the exact type of player that Dylan Cease has been over the last few years, where he has incredible strikeout stuff, but walks would often get him into trouble. And I think Robbie Ray had a season where he had a 2-something whip. And while Cease hasn't quite been there, he's had a couple of seasons around the 1.4 mark, but he's still led the league twice in the last 5 years in K per 9 rate. This is a guy, I think, with a couple of control tweaks, similar to what we've seen from a lot of Toronto pitchers since working with Pete Walker, but in particular Robbie Ray. All of a sudden, he could be getting a handful more innings every start because he's not getting hooked in the 5th with the bases loaded, or the manager lose trust in him after 2 or 3 straight walks. And I think there's then upside on what has effectively been a floor at that 220 strikeout mark. So you can then get 240 strikeouts at $5.25, which I think if you're going to stake, a 2x1 or a 3x1 as a little bit of a sort of value top up, and what will make for a very fun watch for a team that, we haven't probably talked about enough how close they were last year, and they'll firmly be believers that they're able to back up this year. And a guy like Dylan Cease is going to be a huge part of that. So if you want to be tuning into a lot of Blue Jays games this year, and I think a lot of listeners will, that's a play I'm really interested in. I just want to wait for some slightly better prices. And just on that, he is $34 currently for the AL Cy Young. Obviously, he would have to outperform Scooble and Crochet, who are sort of dominant in that market. But I think beyond those two, and maybe my guy Hunter Brown, it really opens right up, and you just never know how much a guy is going to bolt in an award like this. We saw last year, that award basically came down to a couple of points on ERA, a couple of wins. All you need to do is start well and stay in it. And I think if Dylan Cease makes those adjustments, he could be starting well and staying in it. The other strikeout guy I like, and there wasn't really an opportunity to play him last year because he didn't start at the start of the season. So we couldn't really get any of these sort of early futures props on him. But I am very excited for the season of Eury Perez this year. Your baseline looks at 170 strikeouts at $1.83, but then you can kind of ladder that all the way up to what I really like at 200 strikeouts at $8.50, I think represents terrific value. I had his numbers up just before, and he made, what did he make? He ended up making 20 starts last year for 105 strikeouts. And you've got to remember those first few starts, he was on like 40 pitch counts, 50 pitch counts. He didn't pitch at all in the 2024 season. He was only 22 years old. He was the youngest player in baseball last year. So they were very careful with him. And even more interesting was his strikeout rate was only 9.9 as a K.9. So if you're kind of extrapolating a little bit on assuming he makes closer to 30, 32 starts this year, the strikeout rate gets a little bit better, and he pitches deeper into all of his starts because it's now his 3rd year in the league. I think, even money at the 170 strikeout mark looks like terrific value. And then, whether you're going to take the 200 at $8.50 or what was 190, I was looking at that, 190's $4.30. I think that's a guy I'm really going to enjoy following this year. And there'll probably be, a lot of weekly plays with him as well that are sort of matchup dependent too. But they're just a couple from the pitching side that I've kind of circled early. And I think, in my silo sessions over the coming weeks. I'm going to deep dive on a few of those a little bit more, and especially as some more prices come out and give us a little bit more option to find some value. Those who like to bet that way and just kind of get a large chunk of their cash on at the start of the season and follow throughout, stay tuned because there'll be more to come.
Yeah, just a couple things on that. I mean, I think with Yuri Perez, and like you've been waiting 6 months for this play. I know you. Every day you wake up, you're one day closer to being able to put it. You're one day closer to putting in a Yuri Perez futures bet on. Look, with him, it's all about staying healthy because you're right. I mean, he can probably stay. If he's healthy and pitches the entire year, I mean, he could probably have as many as 34 starts in a 162 game season. And if he does that, you think that he'd be well above 190. I mean, that would put him at just above 10 strikeouts per nine, I guess. So, I mean, he's the type of guy that you're right. And it's kind of hard to judge on what he did last year because when they did bring him back, he wasn't really stretched out until really late in the season. That strikeout per nine was probably, it probably still could have been higher because a lot of those early outings that he had were so short. And he was maybe not getting the strikeout numbers that we thought he would when he came back initially, but I think that's normal for a guy that's coming back from having not pitched since 2023.
He still had 6 or more strikeouts in 11 of his 20 starts last year. So if you're working on 32 starts and that being a bit more of a flaw, and he went as high as 11 in one game against the Mets, which was like incredibly impressive because of the lineup they were fielding at the time. I see a world where 180, 190, even 200 are all in range. And I think, a couple of those big double-digit starts really puts you on track for that, which, we found last year when we were following Hunter Brown. If 5 or 6 is kind of an off day, but you're throwing out these 8, 9, 10 or more starts from a strikeout point of view, I think I think he's a guy that's flown under a lot of people's radar, and this should be the year, health assuming, that a lot of people realize, like, wow, this guy's younger than Tariq Skubal, and he's, arguably as exciting a pitching prospect for me as a Paul Skeens, which I know is sort of crazy talk, but if you look at the stuff, it plays. He just hasn't had the opportunity yet.
Yeah, and I mean, look, if you look at his 162 game average, and again, he's been split in 23 and 25 with having injury riddled seasons, one back ended, one front ended. He's at 186 strikeouts for 162 game average, but that average would be skewed based on having injuries on either side of both of those seasons. So I actually think that's a really good play. I mean, this is a guy that had the strikeout per nine in his minor league career that was near 13. And you don't want to heed too much into that, but he spent a lot of time in both AA and AAA before going to the majors. I mean, this guy was racking up huge strikeout numbers at the high levels of the minor leagues when he was healthy. So I think this may be an instance in which we look back at maybe like maybe not the halfway point, but maybe the 3/4 mark of the season, and you're a starter 2 away if he stays healthy. And I'm going to knock on wood because I don't want to mock you because I know this is an investment you're going to have at some point, even though that we said these aren't investments at the moment. But I think this might be one that potentially, if he stays healthy, we look back at like the 3/4 point in the season and go, why was that line so small?
Yeah, like in his 2023 season, he was 93rd percentile in baseball on whiff rate, which is the biggest precursor you can have for strikeouts. He was age 19 in that season. Like there is, I think, enormous upside for a guy like this. Health being the knock, but health is a risk with literally every futures play. You're kind of just owning that risk, and it's no different to backing a start midweek, except maybe that you might be investing a little bit more because it is a futures play. But I think, this is a guy I've circled that I really want to be around early and often.
It is the 13th of February, Australia time, the day that we are recording. Did you see today that the Houston Astros have already named your guy Hunter Brown their opening day starter?
Yeah, I mean, I was even having a look at what his kind of numbers looked like. I think what I found often, I've been doing this for a while, is you very rarely want to back up on a guy 2 years in a row because, we got $5 or $6 or something about him getting 200 last year, and now they're asking you to take even money. It ended up being a comfortable enough watch, but I still think he did it with 2 starts left. I'm now kind of eyeing off some of these guys that I think are there to take the next step. Like an Yuri Perez. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be on Hunter Brown week to week. I just don't think there's enough upside there for you need a lot to go right for something like this. So 200, what did he finish on? 210 or something last year? You're asking him to repeat that season. Whereas this time last year when we were talking about it, it was like, okay, he's just out of the sinker. By all accounts, that's going to be like his key put away pitch. in some ways, he was kind of like the Ayuri Perez talk last year because he was just struggling often throughout the year, but there was clear upside on some of the kind of peripheral stats. And then it was time to pile in and not just back him for the futures, but kind of backed him all year. And I did continuously throw bonus bets on him to win the AL Cy Young, which obviously didn't happen because if it did, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be on a yacht somewhere. But it was still a very fruitful season as a sort of early adopter of a Hunter Brown. And I think Ayuri Perez could be that guy for us this year.
And just on the Dylan Cease play, do you heed anything? I mean, having pitched in the NL West and the AL Central previously, do you look at those opponents in the AL East? I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum last year that with the more balanced schedule, you're not playing those teams as much as possible. But in terms of, playing teams like the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Orioles that you're high on, do you heed much into the whiff rates and the strikeout rates of those teams that they're going to be playing more often? Or is it more so just the upside that you like with Cease, and regardless sort of where he is, you just like the situation that he's in Toronto and don't worry too much about who the opponents are?
It is a bit of a factor. So if you look at last year's strikeout rate, 2025, 21st in the league was Boston, 22nd in the league was Tampa Bay, 24th in the league were the Yankees, and 28th in the league were Baltimore. So you've got all four divisional opponents who are in the bottom third of the league on strikeout rate. This is a guy that has, incredible strikeout stuff that just needs to sort of hone in on that command, but you're getting a base price about something he's done even in, inverted commas, bad years. I think there's still upside there. It's a slightly different play to an Ayuri Perez because he's already on everyone's radar, but he is still kind of considered a bit of a bounce back project in a lot of ways. He scuffled a lot for San Diego, and he struggled to kind of put a couple of good starts together or even a couple of good innings, really. But if he can find that level of consistency, and, Pete Walker, like I said, turned Robbie Ray from a 2-dot whip into a Cy Young winner already. This has all the makings of a similar kind of improvement.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about a lot of teams that he's going to be playing much more of. And again, it's different with the balanced schedule, but you still have to take it into account and how the rotation ends up working. You will see those teams more so than anybody. How does that compare to, say, an NL West where he pitched last year and was up over those 200 strikeouts and, playing teams like the Dodgers, D-backs, Giants? I mean, he won't get to pitch 3 or 4 times against the Rockies, which I guess is one thing that you have to think about.
Yeah, so the Rockies obviously were terrible last year. They were 29th in baseball, better only than the Angels in that department. The Giants were 18th, but where were the Dodgers were 13th, and the D-backs were 7th. So, he was doing it against a tougher division, with the exception of Colorado. But Colorado and Baltimore's numbers were very similar at sort of 28, 29. Disclaimer that I believe Baltimore are going to have a much better season. But I think you look at the Yankees and probably to another extent Boston and Tampa, they built these rosters around 3 true outcome baseball of, hit a home run, take a walk, or strike out. And even Judge, for the mammoth that he is, can easily strike out 2 or 3 times against a starter. So I think the setup is there really nicely for him to be able to consistently be going out and having those 6, 7, 8s, which you need. Not getting hooked early on 1 or 2 strikeouts too early in the season, because that can kind of kill your dreams of 200. But really feeding against a couple of, weaker contact opponents with 10, 11, 12 kind of strikeout tallies. Because, I mean, even last year, which was considered a down year, I mean, he only posted a 1.1 WAR, and his whip was over 1.3. He still had 3 games in double-digit strikeouts, and he had 11 games with 8 strikeouts or more. So, we're not saying he's necessarily going to be posting an ERA under 2, but even when he was getting hit around, like he surrendered 6 runs at Dodger Stadium and had 9 strikeouts. He surrendered 5 runs against the Mets and had 9 strikeouts. Like, this was a guy who, even when he was struggling, was getting strikeouts. Imagine what it will be like if he can just get 10, 20% better.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about a strikeout market because you're not necessarily cheering for a guy to have great success, but you're cheering for a majority of his outs to be swings and misses. Because, I mean, he has fought his command. He did so again last year. I mean, twice in his career, he's led the league in walks. One of those was 2020, which doesn't really count, but he was the league leader in strikeouts per 9 among starters last year with 11.5. So it's interesting to hear those figures, feeling like he's going to a division where he's going to face teams that have a higher whiff rate. And he was, a guy who struck out 215 last year. So I love that play out of you. Not that you're going to play it, because I'm not going to hold you to it, but I think you are going to play it. I think we both know that that's going to come to fruition. Look, before we go, I am going to hold you to this. Give me a team that's maybe an outsider and a bolter. I mean, you've talked about Baltimore a little bit. I think maybe they're not as much of a bolter as you're trying to big them up to be. I mean, they are probably expected to finish fourth in that division. I think they could finish higher than the Yankees that are a 255 chance to win that division. The Orioles are $6 to win the AL East. But maybe give me a bolter somewhere else in baseball that you feel like could, if not win the division, give it a shake and be a sneaky wild card team for 2026. And don't say the St. Louis Cardinals, because I know you'll just be patronizing me if you do.
I won't say the Cardinals. I'll put a little hot disclaimer on the first one and say if the D-backs can just have a good couple of months to start the season so that Corbin Burns can come back, AJ Puck can come back, and Justin Martinez can come back, all from Tommy John surgery around that kind of May, June mark, I think they're going to have an incredibly strong back half of the season. It's just going to depend.
Are you telling me that the first week of the season is the biggest week of the Arizona Diamondbacks
Yeah, just
season?
because I've said goodbye to Hunter Brown and the Washington Nationals does not mean I've said goodbye to my D-backs catchphrase. I think an interesting one that I was kind of looking at before was the Royals, in that you've got an AL Central that kind of seems wide open, right? Like the win line for every team there is pretty much in the 80s. You've got Guardians at 79.5. You've got Royals at 82.5. Minnesota, I think, are a little bit lower. They're 74.5. So there's not a lot of belief there, which is fair enough given, the way their trade deadline sort of unfolded last year.
Their payroll's about $7 million total.
Yeah, and then you've got the White Sox, which you wouldn't be probably too optimistic about, but stranger things have maybe happened. I think the Royals actually stack up to be a team that there was a lot of expectation around them last year, and they kind of fell short on that. And that division was wide open to win for them, and they didn't really kind of insert themselves enough to the same extent that a Detroit did or a Guardians did. And it wouldn't be me calling Detroit a bolter, at 85.5 wins, the same way I'm kind of doing the same with Baltimore. But I think the Royals might be a team to watch. Eric kind of put us onto them around July, August last year as a playoff hopeful and even a potential division winner. And they just scuffled. But I think, another year into some of these young guys, and Bobby Witt could be right there in the MVP conversation again. I think the Royals might be a team that, if Minnesota are dropping off to the extent that we're expecting, who knows what's going to happen with Cleveland? The Class A stuff dropped pretty late in the season last year. He was, someone who attributed to a lot of their wins and success last year. And it kind of felt like the Guardians were having their run of, where the underdog guy, and it's just kind of the magic's ran out a little bit. It could just be time that we see the Royals sort of, assert their dominance potentially on the AL Central, and that wouldn't surprise me at all to see them win the division off the back of a few strong individual performers.
Yeah, a lot happening with that team as well. I mean, it's been a lot of chatter in Kansas City that both they and the Chiefs are going to leave Missouri and actually head to Kansas. So there's a lot of things happening around that franchise at the moment. But you're right. I mean, for playoff team a couple years ago that won a playoff series, and then last year, I mean, it's sort of that sort of 3/4 mark of the season really felt like they were going to make a run, and then just fell off. And I mean, obviously a Detroit team that fared pretty well once they got to the postseason. So I like that play out of you. So keep an eye on the Royals. I'm showing 320 as on the second line of betting for the AL Central.
Oh, just because the problem obviously is that Detroit went out and signed Framber Valdez, and that rotation now looks quite scary. But I'm not sure the lineup is there, and I think it overachieved last year. So yeah, let's see. I'm going to put the Royals on the map early as a team I want to watch and follow.
How's the Tigers signing Framber Valdez before the Tarek Skubal arbitration news came out? Everybody was certain that Tarek had lost his arbitration case. Came out that he won it, and they were like, you know what? If we're going to have to spend money, we might as well spend more of it. Well, as we talked about, plenty of episodes coming your way. We will catch up with Eric at some point. I actually don't know what continent he's on at the moment. I do think he is still in Australia, but there's never really any way of knowing. He's been talked about. He's a little bit squirrely, that fella. But we will get in touch with Eric. We'll have him on the show, and we might have him on location as part of WBC coverage in the next couple weeks. We'll continue to monitor spring training and has talked about a few silo sessions with the three of us in the lead up to opening day. But it's great to be back, Spoon. Good to see your face. Enjoyed our chat, my friend, and looking forward to another season of 2026.
Buckle up. We're nearly there.